Hear ye! Hear ye! Hear ye! We're about to embark on a Nantucket Historical Association podcast to be released on April 1st. The history surrounding Nantucket Town Criers. Come one, come all!
Welcome to the Nantucket Gam, a podcast by the Nantucket Historical Association. I'm Annalie Gilbert-Keith.
I'm Thomas Parrish.
And I'm Adam Dlug.
This month, we're talking about town criers. So how many of us grew up in a town with a town crier?
I definitely did not.
Not I.
Did you?
I did.
You did?
I did. Historic Deerfield, we have a town crier.
What kind of stuff did they cry?
I think he was mostly brought out by the museum in Deerfield to start events for them. It felt a little bit more like a performance than a real role for the town.
Yeah, no, criers today, mostly all performative.
If the case is that town criers today are more of a performative role, where did the role originate from? Why do town criers exist?
The town crier was really an early form of mass communication. The goal was to spread news, advertisements, and important information to towns and cities. In early American history, not everyone could read, much less even have access to a consistent newspaper. So the town crier would go around shouting what the community needed to know.
So were town criers common in cities as well as towns?
As communities grow in their size and complexity, there's a greater need for town criers. So if you have a small town out on the frontier of, 6, 7 people, you probably don't need a town crier. But if you're somewhere like Boston, before the American Revolution, Boston had several town criers, in fact, you could hire.
Was Paul Revere one of them?
I don't think he was.
He was a silversmith.
He was a silversmith.
But he did the job of a town
Except
crier.
he never actually cried it out, because that was the whole thing with the lanterns, was just shh.
Yeah. That is true. But
that's not as fun.
It is not as fun. But that is effectively what a town crier does, right? It communicates to people. And that is what Paul Revere did, even though he wasn't actually shouting it.
Not to continue a historic trope, but is this before or after you have like the kids just like yelling on the side of the street?
Oh, before like a newsie?
Newsies, I think, would last a little bit longer, but that is a form of town crying also.
So it was about at the same time that newsies are working.
Town criers are older because town criers exist before newspapers. So, for example, Shakespeare would have never read a newspaper. Newspapers didn't exist, but how news was communicated was through town criers. And so they really were this part of the infrastructure of mass communication and how news was spread. And so when the English started colonizing what would become the United States, this position came with them. And there were town criers in many of these early English communities as they started to grow and become more complex.
And this is really like this is a position. This is like something that is mandated in a town.
They are a fixture of urban New England, and they're not only just positions, but those regulations surrounding them, what they can and can't do. So, for example, in 1702, the town crier became an appointee in Boston, and you had to be licensed, otherwise you'd be fined.
Is there a test for that license?
I have no idea. Whoever can shout the loudest.
How well can you ring a bell?
Yeah.
Pass your town crier test.
They were also forbidden from saying anything slanderous or obscene. And the punishments were pretty strict, actually.
For not having your town crier license?
No, for shouting anything obscene. Or, It would have been 10 shillings for the crier and 20 shillings for the person who ordered it, which is a pretty hefty fine.
So is the town crier being paid by people to shout out information?
Yeah, in fact, the crier would make most of their money essentially being a vocal bulletin board. People would pay the crowd to make the rounds so everyone know about things like auctions, especially meat and fish auctions for things that go bad quickly. You don't want your recently harvested fish laying around for days until the next newspaper comes out.
You ever been to a meat raffle?
I have not, no.
You've not been to a meat raffle?
I have not.
Well, I guess they don't probably exist much anymore, but I was just thinking that in the same way that the town crier would let you know about a meat auction, nowadays, in certain parts of the United States, the Instagram story is doing the same job to let you know when there's a meat raffle.
Yeah, in some ways, it's just getting word out to people. There's a quote that I found talking about the history of town criers. They weren't criers per se, but going back to ancient Egypt, if we think of Athens...
I thought we weren't talking about...
I know, I said we were going to talk about Europe, and here I am talking about Europe again.
But now you're talking about ancient Egypt.
But if Athens is the birthplace of democracy, the town criers are the midwives that brought it forward. Which is...
I like that, yeah.
But if you think about what do you need for a democracy, you need people to
A lot of people shouting.
A lot of people shouting, a lot of people aware of when the voting is happening, who is even up for nomination and what you're voting for, right?
It's all about being informed.
You have to be informed in a democracy, and town criers do that service.
In ancient Egypt.
I don't know about that.
In ancient Greece.
In Nantucket, Massachusetts. So at what point does Nantucket get a town crier?
The first direct reference I can find to town criers on Nantucket comes in 1828, when the selectmen of Nantucket voted to recommend Samuel Jenks, who was actually the first publisher of the Enquirer newspaper, to be a crier who would, quote, hold himself ready at all times for a fee of 75 cents to give public notice of auction sales, lost children, etc.
So it's one person on call 24/7 for 75 cents.
Basically, yeah. Although I'm curious about how 24/7 it actually was. I don't think there's a lot of urgent news at 3 a.m. But 1828 is interesting because that's really when Nantucket whaling is starting to grow as an economic structure. And so we see town criers be appointed in communities as the towns themselves become larger and more complex, like I've said. And so this is a really interesting moment in which we see Nantucket growing with this new business of whaling. And also by appointing a town crier, this suggests that it's also increasing on the complexity of the town and requiring a greater need to disseminate information around the community.
For anybody who's interested, 75 cents in 1828 comes out to about $25 today. That seems kind of reasonable, you know? Pay a guy $25 and he'll go shout about your meat auction.
That's a bargain.
For a little bit.
What's more memorable, the things the town criers say or the town crier himself?
Well, the town crier themselves would eventually become the centerpiece. But this actually doesn't happen until really after the Civil War. The most famous town crier on Nantucket would be a man named William, or as he's more commonly called, Billy Clark. And he got his start during the Civil War. But he would cry for another 50 years or so on Nantucket and would really he really start to personify what this role was in the second half of the 19th century.
Was there still a strong need for a town crier after the Civil War?
That's a really good question, because the town criers across America had pretty much receded. Literacy rates are going up, so access to newspapers is also going up. You're getting more common daily newspapers, telegraphs come into existence, and so communication is speeding up across the United States. Not all of that reaches Nantucket very quickly. And so even by the end of the Civil War, the position is waning off across the country. But we keep it here on Nantucket, and this is really when Billy Clark gets his start. He worked for a man named John P. Hussey, who would bring newspapers over from the mainland with news about the war. And Billy Clark would pick up those newspapers, they would throw it to him almost as soon as they got to the dock, and he would quickly read it and start shouting the news throughout town. Someone would later describe this spectacle saying, quote, his eyes, too quick for accuracy, lighted over the headlines and immediately cried them out.
So did he get things wrong frequently?
He would occasionally. There's a story that everyone taught about Billy Clark that during the Civil War, he received one of these newspapers, he quickly read it, and instead of reading the Battle of Manassas Junction, he read it the Battle of Molasses Junction. And so he went around the town crying, big battle at Molasses Junction! And until his dying day, that's one of the most memorable things that he ever did.
Was this before or after the molasses flood in Boston?
About 60 years before the molasses flood.
So the Nantucketers were really prepared for that.
Plus, everybody knows that battle is supposed to be called Bull Run.
Yeah.
Not Manassas.
The Battle of Bull Run, yeah.
As Billy Clark is becoming the established town crier, whaling is coming to an end on Nantucket, and tourism would eventually start to pick up. So how does his role shift in that changing economy?
Yeah, so he's a town crier at the time when whaling is really on the decline. Whaling has almost completely left Nantucket. The last whaling ship would leave in 1869, so he's getting started just before whaling is completely finished. But he's also becoming a town crier at a time when town criers are becoming a dying field. Across most of the US, there's not many town criers. And so his dogmatic adherence and character of who he was, because he truly was a character, also made him unique. He was not the only town crier. There were still other ones who would do it. Alvin Hull is a notable example. But as you mentioned, tourism is starting to pick up. And so seeing the town crier, this, staple of an old-fashioned tradition, and someone who took it so seriously, like Billy Clark, became part of the experience of Nantucket. And so as we transition, really in like the 1870s, 1880s, Nantucket positions itself to sell this island as a historic, nostalgia, quaint community. And part of that is a community that's still communicated with a town crier. Part of it is the old-fashioned shingles. Part of it is this, old whaling infrastructure. And having someone communicate in the old-fashioned way that dates back to,
Ye olden times.
Ye olden times, yeah.
So Billy Clark kind of becomes a character almost.
100%. Yeah. We have these tourist booklets in our collection from the 1880s. And Billy Clark, in his role as the town crier, is almost always listed as one of the must-see things on the island. Often he's even listed before going to the oldest house, the old mill. He really is part of the staple attraction of the island. This, historical role really becomes part of the experience of Nantucket. Billy Clark became known. He would go up to the top of the Unitarian Church, and he would look out for boats. And whenever the ferry was coming over from Woods Hole, as soon as he saw it, on a clear day, it'd be about a little over an hour away, he would take his horn, which some describe nostalgically, some say sounded terrible, like a braying of a donkey that you couldn't escape. And he would blow his horn out of each side of the church cupola and let everyone know that the boat was on its way. And I don't believe he was compensated for this. This is just part of, the character of the town crier he took on.
Routine.
It was his routine. And a lot of people who write about Nantucket in the 1880s, visiting or living here, this is part of their description of the island, is good old Billy Clark up in the Unitarian Church, blowing his horn and that braying of a donkey echoing through the island.
I think there's a picture of him and his horn on one of the steamship boats.
That photo is him in a doorway at an angle, holding his horn in one hand and a bunch of papers in the other. Those papers would be what he was crying, presumably, and the horn would be to get people's attention. And he took that photo very specifically in order to sell postcards and cabinet cards and images of himself to tourists. So not only is he part of the experience, he's also selling himself, literally selling images of himself to tourists to make money. But I also want to point out, he was still a legitimate crier. Okay? In the 1870s, he takes out newspaper ads to promote himself as a crier.
So as he becomes this character, this tourist attraction, but he's still the town crier, does that change his routine as the town crier? Like how is he an attraction?
I think in some ways it actually cements it, because I think in some ways he's validated in this routine for a type of job that's really fading. And the town itself is self-aware that this is a dying field and that they are holding on to it. In the 1870s, they weren't really mainstream, but the Athenaeum, the local library, was hosting a lecture, and they put out an ad in the newspaper saying, should a lecturer arrive on Monday, due notice will be given by that peculiar institution of ours, the town crier. So they're self-aware that this is not mainstream, but they're still using it. It is still part of the experience on Nantucket by the 1870s. And he writes saying that, quote, probably the only town crier in the country is at Nantucket. He is their local column and cries through the streets with important news. And so again, you see this pattern of people noticing that this is not common mainstream, but it really is part of the experience on Nantucket. And this peculiar institution that Nantucketers had, really became seen as Billy Clark. And often describing the town crier and Billy Clark became one and the same. Right? The position becomes Billy Clark and Billy Clark becomes the position. And so when you have someone writing to a friend on Nantucket, won't you please be sure and have the town crier on hand when I come? If there's anything I enjoy this side of California, it is the voice and bell of the Nantucket town crier. And who is he describing? Well, it's the infatigable Billy Clark.
So he's using the horn and the bell and then also shouting. So this is a very loud little man.
Yes.
He's doing it for the love of the game.
He is, very much so, yes. He was very loud, and visitors would describe coming to Nantucket and being startled when all of a sudden you round a corner and there's Billy Clark with his horn and bell, and it would surprise them, or this bell would blow right behind them, and he would kind of half walk, half trot through the town when he was making announcements. So you would be walking, all of a sudden he's on one side of town, and next thing you know, he's on the other side of town, making the announcements like, George E. Morris has a meat auction.
He's like the Phantom of the Opera. He's everywhere. He's all around.
Yes.
Surely his voice would get tired with all that shouting.
Yes, and unfortunately, it get tired pretty quick. People would describe his voice as very raspy and actually pretty hard to understand. They say that he cried himself hoarse with the excitement of the Civil War.
Which was at the beginning of his career.
Yeah, and unfortunately, his voice only got worse over time. And that sort of became part of the draw of his experience, right? You couldn't really always understand what he was saying, but you could see the passion. And so, like I said, he still was used as a town crier in the traditional sense of hiring to spread news, but he also was spreading the news on his own account. And what I'm trying to say is that he, in many ways, was kind of an eccentric guy. And he really took this role very seriously, but it stopped becoming a practical part of the experience and more an emotive part of the experience of old, quaint Nantucket. And so as Nantucket transitions into more of a tourist economy that relies on that, that's the image we're creating, right? It's in many ways still the image we're creating today. The town crier, this historic role that's no longer really usable, but people know, that really becomes part of the ambiance of why you come to Nantucket. And so even though you couldn't really understand what he was saying all the time, the passion and commitment that Clark had to this role is what made him a character and a staple of Nantucket. There's a great quote from Nantucket historian Clay Lancaster. He wrote an article about Billy Clark and says that, quote, if ever a man made a career of being a local character, it was Nantucket's longtime crier, Billy Clark.
When did Billy Clark cry his last cry?
His health would really decline at the end of the 19th century, and he would cry when he could and would still continue to be around Nantucket. But between losing his voice and his health really taking a turn for the worse, he wasn't able to do the job consistently anymore, and eventually in 1905, he even sells his horn to Mr. Chenoweth, the owner of an old curiosity shop in town. But the town itself really stepped up and really cared about Billy Clark. He really was a staple and really was a character. And even for his eccentric, character, he was very well respected. When the railroad came to Nantucket, he drove the last golden spike at the end of the railroad, right? He was the one that completed the railroad. He was seen as having that honor. And so towards the end of his life, when he really can't do this anymore, he didn't have the means to take care of himself. Crying the way that he did was not the most profitable endeavor. And he did a lot of it for free because it's what he enjoyed and what he took pride in. And so his sister and her husband really had to step up and take care of him in his old age. And on good days, he would go down to the top of Main Street and he would sell postcards of himself. But it really wasn't enough. And this is when the town stepped in. And for someone they respected, that was really a part of the tourist experience that was putting Nantucket back on the map. They were willing to help him. And so they hosted a benefit concert for him and brought in a mezzo-soprano singer named Margarita Hall, who was associated with the New York and Boston symphonies, and had a concert, and the money was donated to help take care of him. This was in 1905, but in 1908, his health continued. He continued to not being able to work, and the local newspaper published an article saying that, quote, the end is near.
My God.
And
that is dark.
It is.
That's a dark tagline.
And sad. But this is part of the news, that this beloved staple of the community, probably was on his last legs.
Having that as a headline also sort of makes him bigger than life.
Yeah.
saying the end is near and it's about a person. It's not just about the person, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And this was also a call to action because the newspaper for whom he used to work started opening a Billy Clark fund to solicit donations. And ultimately, in the next couple of months, they raised $372. And so by the summer of 1909, that money was going towards caring for Billy Clark. So the community was taking care of Billy Clark as best as they could. And donations were coming from all over, as well as Kansas City, out in Missouri, to help take care of this island icon. Unfortunately, you can't fight death. And he would eventually pass away on August 21st, 1909. And in the obituary, there's a poem that was written in 1880 by a visitor from Albany, New York. And part of it reads, "I am getting in years and I'm growing splenectic. I no longer take baths at clean shore or cliff, blue fishing I hate and squantums go tedious. And all that I want of the South Shore's a sniff, but the dear, old, antique, time-honored Nantucket, how dearly I love it, no mortal can tell. Its lanes, its sands, its tips, its auctions, its Billy, and even, yes, even his bell. The dulcet-toned Billy, the tender-voiced Billy, the Billy who owns that mellifluous bell."
When he passed away, was there a new town crier appointed?
Billy Clark would be the last town crier on Nantucket for quite a while. When he passed away, that was seen as the end of the position, right? It's not a profitable position, it's an old-fashioned position.
And how do you replace a legend?
Exactly. Like at the funeral procession when they took him to Prospect Hill, where he's still buried, there's a great quote where a woman was crying and her husband leans over and is quoted as saying, "Don't be sad. I'll bet Billy's already got a hold of Gabriel's trumpet and he'll wind up getting his job soon." Of course, the great messenger of in heaven, right? Gabriel, which is a town crier on a much bigger scale. But no one would step up to take his post, and the position of town crier would sit silent for quite a while.
At what point did it come back?
Well, there were a couple kind of one-off town criers who would do it performatively, but there's several articles published in the 20th century. We need a town crier. We want a town crier back. Look at these other town criers, and really wanting someone to step up. But no one would really take on the position until the 1970s when a guy who many listeners who've been on Nantucket for quite a while may know, Curtis Barnes, stepped into that position and really revived the town crier on Nantucket. And that was in no small part because of Stroll, this winter tradition that we have on Nantucket to bring people to the island in the off-season. Curtis Barnes started to become part of that tradition. And he would hold that position for years and years and years. And many of our listeners who were on island in the 70s or 80s probably remember him. But in 2010, he would pass that position to Eric Goddard, who would take up the town crier's bell and is still crying today.
I always look forward to seeing him kick off sort of the first wave of the season at the Daffodil Festival, which is coming right up. And I'm excited to hear what he has to say when he joins us in just a minute.
Hey, yay! Hey, yay! Hey, yay!
Welcome back to the Nantucket Gam. Adam and I now have the distinct privilege of being joined by Eric Goddard, who is Nantucket's town crier. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's rather illustrious, I'd say, but I do appreciate that.
That's what we go for around here. Illustrious.
Well, I want to start at the beginning. You became the town crier in 2010 when Curtis Barnes stepped down. But I want to ask, how did you become the town crier? Was this a childhood dream, or how did you follow in the shoes of Curtis Barnes?
I had no idea what a town crier was when I was a kid. So I sort of did fall into it in that we were friends with Curtis for many, many years. In fact, Curtis was the first person my wife met on Nantucket way back when. I guess that's 30 plus years ago now. So Curtis was gesturing about his potential retirement. And he asked me if I would be able to take the role. And we talked about it for a good year plus. So it wasn't just a spontaneous answer. The considerations at the time, of course, were, for me anyways, with younger children, were having to be on Nantucket for the holiday seasons. We couldn't go to grandma's at Thanksgiving anymore because of the tree lighting the next day. So those things were considered seriously. And of course, then we ended up getting together, and he passed the bell, as they say. We did the first year together 16 years ago, and then from there I took it over solely. So it's been a good run. It's certainly been an honor, and as my friend Tibby Allen describes it, it's so corny. It's cute.
Well, I think people might come to Nantucket and not always know that we do have a town crier, or even what a town crier is. Could you explain a little bit of what the responsibilities and the role of a town crier is?
Contemporary explanation would be, and specific to Nantucket, of course, and I think generally around the world, there's actually around 300, to my knowledge anyways, about 350 town criers globally. And what I see us as doing is essentially being ambassadors for our towns. In my case, in Nantucket's case, I do essentially MC or introduce events like the tree lighting the day after Thanksgiving, the red ticket drawing on Christmas Eve. I do some impromptu things around the year. I'll potentially ring bride and grooms after their wedding up to their reception. I'll announce some private events. Sometimes I've rang the Boston Pop celebration, and then of course the biggest event, really traditional event out here, is Christmas Stroll, and I have the absolute honor of ringing Santa Claus up Main Street to meet with all the children.
So these are some of the most popular events on island, and whenever I've seen you at these events, you typically have a similar outfit. I imagine a dark colored long coat, a top hat. I think you usually have a red scarf and bell in hand. Did you choose that outfit, or how did that come to be?
I did choose it. I put thought into it, really from Nantucket's perspective of town criers. They've been around for quite some time, hundreds of years, although the most documented was since the mid-1800s. And in my mind, it sort of correlated the choice of outfit to that time period, to the 1800s through the early 1900s. There was a sort of a notorious town crier named Billy Clark that wore a top hat, and although he used a bell, and he also used a horn.
We touched on Billy Clark in the previous portion of this episode, and he was just a fascinating character. Like, you read it and you're like, is this true? And then two other people say it, and you're like, well, maybe it is true.
Yeah, very eccentric, as I understand it. In fact, his horn that he used resides in the Unitarian Church. I don't know if you touched on that. I thought that I'm still trying to get a hold of that.
It's one of the saddest parts of his story is that as he's getting older, he has to sell his bell, and he keeps the receipt, seeming to be a major moment in his life.
He was very enthusiastic.
Yes, that's one way to put it. Yes,
filled with eccentricity,
almost caricaturing himself as part of the job.
Yeah, really. I would say I would completely agree with that. There's been at least a dozen other criers, but he certainly stands out as one of the most eccentric and enthusiastic.
Part of the outfit is inspired by him, yes?
It is by him, and I think by the era, I would say. So the top hat, I sourced everything myself, although the Chamber of Commerce bought the bell for me. Curtis had a bell, but he didn't want to give it up. So we'll touch on that maybe a little bit later. I've got some words for Curtis Barnes on that. But anyways, I did create the outfit. He gave me what I would call the ascot, the white ascot, and the red scarf that you referred to actually is only worn on Christmas Stroll.
Oh.
My mother actually knitted that scarf for me, and it's an extra long scarf that has only been worn over the last 16 years for Christmas stroll.
Wow.
Never anywhere else. So every other event that I participate in, I participate in what I would call my normal uniform.
And is that uniform standard?
It's really just specific to Nantucket. I think that I am the most subdued crier, outfit-wise, out of any other that I've met, and I've met a good number, maybe 30 of them, from Canada and Great Britain and the United States. So my era, an idea is, as I said, from that era, and I guess particularly, or to some extent, Quaker influenced.
I won't say that, we were judging photos of other criers when we saw some looking up stuff for this episode, but you could say that there's some flamboyant choices out there.
There certainly is. I wish we were a more flamboyant, less Quaker island, so I could have those gold bars on my shoulder and all that fun stuff.
I think people appreciate the sort of traditional style, though.
It's, I think, the most and best suited for Nantucket. So that's what I'll stay at, I should say.
Before we started recording, you also mentioned a decision that you made that distinguishes yourself from other criers, and that's that you say hear ye, as opposed to oye, oye. Can you explain that a little bit, or why you made that decision?
Well, for me, I just thought that, it was another era as well, and French and European-based cry. I have to say that all the other criers I've interacted with, they all use oye rather than hear ye. And I thought about, well, maybe I should change that. But then I thought, well, you know what? I don't think Billy Clark would be yelling "Oyez, oyez" in 1864. I just don't think it would happen like that. So we'll stay with "Hear ye."
Do you communicate with other criers often and talk about work or other, conferences that you get together and discuss crying?
Not often. I am friendly with a number of them. There's a guy from New Jersey that will email or text every once in a while, and the Provincetown Mass Town Crier is very active, and so there's a few we interact with, but there is I guess one would say, a competition annually somewhere around the United States for criers within the United States.
How do you compete? What are the the rankings of qualifications to be a successful town crier?
Besides Big Mouth?
Yeah.
They require us to write 2 different cries, one about your hometown and then one about the town that you're visiting. And then you go at it. And there's actually judges. And in fact, the one I participated was in P-Town. And one of the judges came from Great Britain, from England. It's just a cast of characters, really.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's a bunch of knuckleheads walking around there.
Well, how'd you do in the competition?
Fun. Horrible. Horribly. But I have to say I got the best laugh.
Do you remember your cry?
Well, I have it written down. I don't remember it, but okay. I started out that in that loud voice that I was the man from Nantucket. Just not that one. And the place went nuts. And then I really flubbed the rest of it. But I had fun. It was super.
Do you have other fond memories of being the Nantucket crier?
I have had a lot of great memories. It's certainly 16 years has been a good run to collect up wonderful interactions, wonderful memories. Most of them, or many of them, with the little children that I come in contact with really around getting Santa Claus off the Coast Guard cutter. I have become a tradition of mine when I first started becoming the town crier. I put up a small young person to be my assistant town crier. And they get dressed up and I get them a little assistant town crier bell every year. It's been really rewarding to have that part for the Christmas stroll event. I essentially just introduce them and take them down to collect Santa Claus off the cutter and put them onto the old antique fire truck. And then they kind of go on their way, but it's really been lovely. I've had funnier interactions with adults. Some guy grabbed my bell once and poured his gin and tonic in it. Just that party weekend, right? That was a little later than the Santa Claus event, thankfully, to interacting with President Biden and his family. So there is a whole bucket of wonderful memories that I have around being town crier. I was researching some stuff a while back. There was a cry that was put out for a tag sale on Main Street. The cry went for the woman on Main Street for the tag sale all around town for a good half an hour or so. And that crier, and I don't know who that was. I don't recall who that was, but he came back to get paid his 50 cents. Well, the tag sale hadn't sold anything yet, so she didn't have any money. So that crier was angry enough to go around town and uncry that tag sale. I always love that one.
What do you mean uncry? Like it's called off?
That's it.
Take it
Call
back.
it off.
Yeah.
Why do you think that we hold the post on Nantucket? There are many other historic professions, like night watchman or, the milkman or these things that were integral to life here on Nantucket and elsewhere that was part of the popular experience. But yet the town crier is the one that we hold on to and keep as part of our island community.
That's easy. Tourism. It's all about tourism. I work really and essentially at the discretion of, in many ways, not always, but many ways, for the Chamber of Commerce. So I do their events. I'll do anything they ask me to do and be happy about it. And then, as you know, I do additional things, as I've mentioned. But yeah, it's all about tourism. Most of the tourists, I think, appreciate the town crier role. They like the spectacle. They like, of course, the history. Funny enough, after Santa Claus is placed wherever he meets the children that year, these days it's back at Pacific National Bank, I kind of hang out all day and go into the shops and say hello to people and welcome them and Merry Christmas them. Many years ago, I went up into the Anglers Club down off Old South Wharf. I went up and I rang the bell. Well, ringing the bell inside of a building is generally frowned upon.
It's not a quiet bell either.
No, it's not a quiet bell. So I did that, and I wished everybody a Merry Christmas, and all those local people up there, they're having lunch or doing whatever they're doing, and not one looked up. And then in the tourist spots, like I'll go through the Brotherhood or any restaurant on stroll weekend on a Saturday, and I'll go through, and it's like the C parts, and people erupt with applause and enthusiasm. So I love that. I love the response from the Angler Club members. It was super funny.
I think that response and also the response you talked about earlier, where with kids especially, when you're bringing in Santa, that's almost, I understand practically you said that Chamber of Commerce is the one who is kind of giving you the business, but that's I think what most people take away from your work is, I'm not sure what the right term is, almost like a mascot of the island, somebody who, carries the spirit of the season, brings the community together, that sort of thing.
I completely agree. The reaction of the children is really lovely to see their faces when Santa Claus comes up, and it couldn't give me a better or bigger charge than participating as the crier for that event. I think that is as I said, the favorite thing that I do.
I think every year on the Current or the Inquirer and Meal, there's a photo of you with a young individual, and you are not a small person, so I feel like the picture is usually them at your knee. The height difference is always funny, but there's always the bell in hand. Is there a story behind the bell, or how did you choose that bell, or is it Curtis Barnes' bell, or is it a different bell?
No, it's not Curtis Barnes' bell. Actually, those pictures, your reference to the picture, my all-time favorite picture, I think, as the town crier, one of the few, is the last stroll with my little assistant, Gordon McVoy. And there was a picture that I forget who took it, but the I&M took it, I believe. I just love it. He's looking up at me with his little bell. It's precious. But actually, the bell, I did buy the bell. I bought most of the things. I got the ascot from Curtis, and I tried to get his bell. And the bell is somewhat special. Well, it certainly is to him. And historically, it's special. So actually, I pulled something. I wanna, if I may, I'd like to read it.
Go ahead.
And this is about Curtis, and this article was in the Yesterday's Island 20 plus years ago or so. So he was gifted the bell when he left his position. He worked at Tufts in 1985. And on the curve of the bell is ARP for Air Raid Patrol. So the bell was actually a raid warning bell from London. And it has the name Fidian on it, which is, I guess, a Cornwall surname. And it apparently that name derives from Latin, which becomes Vivian, which means alive or living. This is the kicker right here. This is the sentence I want to convey, particularly so. Curtis plans to donate Fidian to the chamber should he retire, and that it may become the town crier's bell in perpetuity. I've been trying to get that bell for years, and he won't give it up. I went and was honored with crying the actual launch of the USS Nantucket.
Oh, the new naval ship.
Yeah. And so I did finagle that bell from, what's more perfect than that? Boston Harbor, which was a whole nother event. It was a beautiful day, and being there in front of the ship with the governor and, all the admirals and the Nantucket commander. And then in the background, there's Bunker Hill and Old Ironside. It was almost overwhelming looking up with all these thousands of people and seeing the backdrop with Bunker Hill and the USS Constitution was amazing. So I borrowed that bell appropriately to do that ring, to launch this ceremony. And I was really hoping Curtis would forget.
Did you try and put it in your back pocket?
Oh, man, I tried. So sure enough, I got a call a few days later. Hey, where's that bell? Curtis. So this is very important. This paper right here, that information. So Curtis, if you're listening.
Where's the bell, Curtis?
Show me the bell, Curtis.
So what's the story of the bell that you currently have? Is there any story behind that one?
Zero.
Okay.
I ordered it online. And I do have to say, though, it has a wonderful tone. It's a deep tone, and it's I like it better, the tone. Believe it or not, there's a different tone to the bell than Fidian. And Fidian is a little different pitch. It's not quite as resounding as the bell that I use. So I don't quite like the ring quite as much as the one I have. But maybe then again, it's just because I'm used to it.
Thinking about what comes next, do you have anyone in mind that you're training up or sending to cryo school, or are you thinking about the next wave of town criers here on Nantucket?
It's only natural that I would think about that, but I want to continue to do this as long as I can, or as long as you all have me. I want to be an old crotchety town crier in his mid-80s is what I really hope for.
Yeah.
Of course, I've thought about who might be the next crier, but I think I might have different thoughts in 20 years. I think that it would be logical to pick a person that, might be like I was more in my early 40s when I took it over, or started mid 40s when I started doing it. So some of the people I'm thinking about now, might be 55 or 60 by the time I give it up. So I guess it just depends on when I transfer the bell. And this bell I will give over.
I have one more question for you. When you tell people you're the town crier, how do people typically respond to that?
Well, I guess it depends on if they're on island or off. And some people, what's that? Off island. People on island, they think it's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
The tourists and the visitors, they think it's a pretty neat job, and I appreciate that. I certainly agree.
Is it a full-time job?
No, and it's actually unpaid. Libby Gibson, if you're listening, we could change that. It's not a full-time job by any means, but it's always fun putting the hat and getting the bell out.
It seems like it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Nantucket Gam, and look forward to seeing you around the island at some of the major events that are coming up soon.
Well, I'm absolutely honored to be part of this, and I appreciate your effort. And of course, the NHA is extraordinary. That's a wrap, boys.
Thank you so much.
Right on.
Absolute pleasure.
For more information, head to nha.org or check out the show notes. This episode was developed and created by Thomas Parrish, Adam DeLogue, and Annalie Gilbert Keith. Special thanks to our Chief Curator, Michael R. Harrison, and our Director of Collections and Research Services, Amelia Holmes. Our theme music was composed and performed by Isaiah Williams. Other music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. The Nantucket Gam is a production of the Nantucket Historical Association. Thanks for listening.